Hi, everyone. This is Kate, the nurse educator at Women's Health Network. Today we're talking about something every woman has experienced in her lifetime, food cravings. I'm joined today by two of our medical experts who will be answering the most frequently asked questions on food cravings and how to deal with them. So today we have our naturopathic doctor, Dr. Mary James, joining us from North Carolina. Hi, Mary.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Thanks for being here. And we also have a medical anthropologist and certified clinical nutritionist specializing in bone health, Dr. Susan Brown, joining us from New York today. Hi, Susan.
Hello, how are y'all doing?
Great, great. Thanks for being here. So why don't we get right into things? The first question that we have that we get pretty often is, I'm constantly thinking about food. What can I do? Mary?
Well, it's a big question, mostly because we're all different and we all eat, and so usually food cravings for any of us is a combination of emotional factors and physiological factors. So in terms of what we can do about it, I would suggest that number one, it's helpful to learn about the effects that different foods have on our appetite. I mean, there are a number of foods that actually stimulate signals in the body that suppress our appetite naturally, and there are other foods that do the opposite and actually act like drugs in the body. So learning about those can help us make choices that make those cravings a lot less. In that way, we can work with our biology. I mean, really help it to help us. And that way we can start to make different food choices and over the next few weeks see how they impact our appetite, our cravings. And then the third part I would suggest is to become more conscious, especially of what we're feeling. Because for most of us, like I said, it's a combination of physical and emotional factors. The emotional part is often related to grabbing food as a comfort food or a comfort measure to stuff our feelings, numb our feelings, reward ourselves, that sort of thing. So learning all that and becoming more conscious can start to get us on that path.
That's great. Susan, do you have anything to add?
Well, I certainly agree with Mary's perspective that awareness is really important. And it's kind of fun, you know. I may say, I'm thinking about food all the time, but I'm not thinking about rice, I'm not thinking about lentils. I'm probably thinking about certain foods that actually perhaps serve as stimulants, perhaps sugar, coffee, perhaps wheat products, dairy products. So the awareness of which foods am I thinking about can really be helpful. And very often we have a special relationship to those foods. Sometimes it may even be an allergic relationship. When we eat them, we feel better. Sometimes they're pick-me-up foods, and we tend to be exhausting ourselves, so we're extremely tired. So we think about foods that are going to serve as stimulants. Becoming aware of which foods you are thinking about all the time is a very important thing. And experimenting, like Mary said, try eliminating certain foods, seeing, am I any more stable? What we do in my practice here at the Center for Better Bones is have people keep a diet record of what they eat and actually what we call a satisfaction index. So in other words, if I have oatmeal and nuts for breakfast, maybe with a little yogurt, and then I maybe have some rice and beans and steamed vegetables for lunch, you look and see how satisfied am I after every meal, and how long do I go without being hungry again, without thinking about food again. And so it may turn out that when I have my oatmeal and nuts, I'm great for several hours. I don't even think of food till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But if I have cold cereal, and this is indeed my personal case, I'll be hungry within a few hours. And so we want to check and see which foods leave us satisfied longer. And I'm sure, as we'll talk about, which foods keep blood sugar nice and stable, because many times we start thinking about food because our blood sugar drops. And of course, as Mary alluded to, certain foods like high-fat foods, good quality fats, can really keep you satisfied for a longer period of time. But check out your relationship to which foods it is you're thinking about all the time, and it's probably not beans and rice.
Right. I know for me, it definitely is not.
Yeah.
But that really kind of feeds into our next question, which is why do I have food cravings? Why do they happen in the first place? I know part of that is emotional, but what are the other factors contributing?
I think a lot of us assume that it's all emotional, or that it's that to have food cravings is a sign of weakness, and that to give in to food cravings is a matter of poor self-discipline, and
Hmm.
and unfortunately that creates often a vicious cycle in ourselves where we give in to the foods that we don't want to be eating because they don't necessarily feel like smart food choices. And then we feel bad about ourselves for doing that. We beat ourselves up, and so then we reach for more of that food to feel, well, to offset the bad feelings that we have inside. Um, Eating or food obsession, food cravings can be very complex, and for some people, the emotional, the psychological aspects of that are huge. They're very significant. And they may go back years and years to issues from our childhood. And we may have had our whole lifetimes to practice certain habits of using foods, in a comfort kind of way, a reward or distracting, or especially numbing our feelings, like alcohol might. But if we pay attention to the things that Susan was talking about with our food choices, learn about, as I was saying, learn about the effects that different foods have on our appetite, and then choose foods that work with our biology, even those psychological factors, the emotional motivators to eat, are tempered. It becomes a lot easier to make those changes. So like some foods, especially proteins, will stimulate these what are called satiety signals in the body. So signals that naturally suppress appetite. And I was amazed to learn how many of those signals exist in the body. A whole lot more of them put the brakes on appetite than do the opposite. But then there are foods, unfortunately, all the yummy foods, the alluring foods, the high fat, high sugar, you know, um, the highly palatable foods that can stimulate the few hunger signals that we have in our bodies, and they can also act like drugs in our body, even stimulating dopamine receptors like drugs do. So we have a physical craving to them, for them. And then, as Susan was talking about, blood sugar is a huge factor, more for some people than for others. I know I'm very sensitive to blood sugar changes, so we can choose different kinds of carbohydrates that will break down more slowly than others, and therefore stabilize our blood sugar, so we don't get reactive hypoglycemia or blood sugar crashes that then make us crave more sugar. That's a biological survival mechanism to go for the thing that will rectify the imbalance that we've just created by the sugar. Then there are aspects like sleep, which we can talk about a little bit later.
Okay, great. And Susan, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, all of those points are so important, and in our practice, what we see is that food allergies are really very important. In fact, what we used to do in the old days, if you wanted to see what people were sensitive to, you asked them, what foods do you crave? What foods do you really not want to stop eating? And typically a person would say, oh, I haven't got any foods, except you really don't take away my bread. I really have to have my bread. And it's sort of interesting, like Mary suggested, often when you have an allergic reaction, it's really that these proteins are being poorly digested, leaking through the gut, getting into the bloodstream, and you actually have an immune response. And that immune response can actually, it's kind of chemicals that are given off to fight that allergy, actually make you feel good for a short period of time. And there is an addictive relationship to things you're sensitive to, so it's really kind of fun to say, but I just can't give up my dairy, or proteins that are hard to digest, like wheat and dairy, soy often fall into that category. So to look at the foods that you crave and see, let me just eliminate them for a little period of time and see if I'm more stable. And of course, blood sugar, I'm one of those people that can have a lot of fluctuations in blood sugar if I am not careful. And so I really can tell the difference between foods to stay away from coffee, sugar, alcohol, all those refined, simple sugars that can be too much of a stimulant. And when your blood sugar raises, you feel great, but then it lowers. You know, you have your coffee and donuts and you would have at breakfast, and then by 10 o'clock, they're very hungry again, like the bottom falls out of your stomach. So you want to stay away from those stimulants and eat regular, steady meals with adequate protein and fat. And be aware of which foods keep you more satisfied and more stable in your energy and your emotional well-being. Yep.
And, you know, a lot of times we hear that when you're craving something, when you're craving a food, it's because it's something that your body is deficient in, like a certain mineral, or that there's, you know, maybe an underlying, in addition to food sensitivities, maybe an underlying thyroid issue or something else like that. Is that something that you have seen in your practice?
Yeah, I can say it's really true. Like, for example, many people have actually low blood pressure. Those same people that tend to worry a lot, that tend to get in low blood sugar, have low blood pressure, and so they might crave salty foods. And another person would say, gosh, you're eating so much salt, but actually that salt is important to the person. So I would say it's a very interesting thing that when you crave a food, I would eat that food, and then I'd see how did I feel afterwards. If I feel, you know, I feel great, and I feel great for many hours afterwards, I'd say probably that's your body's wisdom. It's also your body's wisdom when you crave sugar because you had too much caffeine and you're getting into low blood sugar. The body is recovering, but we don't feel so good from it. So we might say, hey, you know, this was a survival strategy. It worked, but it really didn't lead to optimum health I didn't feel great over the context of the whole day. I don't know, Mary, what do you think about that? Because I'm telling people to, in one sense, to go with their internal wisdom, but the other sense to be careful that the foods you crave could be a tip-off to things you're sensitive to.
I think that's right on. I would add, though, that our bodies can fool ourselves.
Okay.
Those internal signals can be kind of confusing. You're absolutely right, Susan, that you know, if our blood sugar is low because we have you know, there are mechanisms awry that don't help the body to retain sodium, for instance, we're going to crave sugar. Or if our adrenals are low, we'll crave sugar. And that helps us to feel a little bit better, but it doesn't always get to the root of the problem. If our blood sugar is low, we crave sugar because it's the fastest way to get the blood glucose back up. On the other hand, that's probably the worst choice we can make for stopping those cravings for sugar. So if we learn about how complex carbohydrates, for instance, the carbohydrates that naturally are in food, like whole grains, legumes, beans, vegetables, are a better choice of carbohydrate and can still raise the blood sugar in a more gradual, stable, long-lasting kind of way than a white flour product, especially with sugar added, which, boom, it just breaks down in the blood sugar very quickly. And then our blood sugar spikes, the insulin spikes, the blood sugar crashes, and lo and behold, we're really hungry for sugar again. So is that the body's wisdom, or is that an imbalance that is triggering, you know, certain cravings? So I'm in full agreement with your listen to your body. I think we should always listen to our bodies and the trial and error approach. But I think also the more we can know about how different foods affect us and what our own unique imbalances are, the more we can make smart choices that sometimes bypass or are other than what we think our bodies are telling us to do.
Great. So our next question, which I know we've touched on this in the previous answers, what are the most helpful tips for managing the cravings when they do come?
I've got a secret I'm going to share with everybody. This secret I've made a living on for 20 years. That secret is chromium. The mineral chromium stabilizes blood sugar. It produces glucose tolerance factor. And most of us are deficient in chromium, largely because the soils are deficient, and because it's only in certain grain products like wheat and organ meat, which we don't eat anymore. You know, as an anthropologist, it's really fun to note that around the world, wherever they eat meat, a lot of meat, they always eat all the organs and they eat the bones. There's various, because those are very concentrated in nutrients. Chromium is in the organ meat. Chromium will stabilize blood sugar. So if you have a craving for sweet, you start taking chromium. 200 micrograms is a minimum amount. Many times people take 200 micrograms 3 times a day, and your craving for sweet will go away within a very short period of time. In fact, chromium is very effective at stabilizing blood sugar and diabetes, and often they use 200 micrograms even 5 times a day. So talk to your nutritionist, get some chromium growing. It's going to be a lot easier.
Hey, I've got a secret.
What is it, Mary?
I think one helpful little tip is to gradually reduce the amount of sugar and or salt that we take in. And you will be amazed to see how much those cravings actually start to change over the next few weeks. We train our taste buds to want a certain level of sweetness or a certain level of saltiness, and it feels fixed. But if we start to ratchet that down a little bit, we often find that those will change, and we suddenly don't, suddenly we're finding foods too sweet or too salty. So that's one way to make it easier. I also think it's really important, especially for those of us who beat ourselves up for grabbing the junk food because it tastes good, is to move temptation out of our immediate environment, to move it out of our houses, to move it out of our workplace. Because if it's there, if I have ice cream in my freezer and I have a low moment or a bored moment, a call that I wish I could put out of my mind, or I just want to be treated, I'm going to go for that ice cream. I mean, there's no way that I'm not going for it. So if it's not here, then I might take a walk instead, or I might write down my feelings, or I might make a call to someone who's going to help me feel better, or just something other than grabbing the food that I'm going to wind up feeling bad about having grabbed.
And that's great. That's a first step, I know, for a lot of changes, is just eliminate, kind of purge your environment of whatever that trigger food is for you. This is our final question, but how can I change my relationship with food? I know it's kind of complex, the factors that make up our relationship to food. It goes back to our childhood, like you said before, Mary. But what's some advice for changing the relationship with food?
Well, the first thing we mentioned, of course, you want to have all the nuts and bolts nutrients, so it's not difficult, so you aren't searching around unconsciously for certain nutrients that you don't have, and often using a very good broad spectrum multivitamin and mineral in combination with the alkaline diet will really be a big help. And then I think what's very important, how to change anything, is with awareness. And so we start paying attention. We start even asking our body, is this food a good food for me? Do I really need this food? We start paying attention, and maybe even keeping records of what we eat, how we feel afterwards, how long we're satisfied. Maybe even, how many times have we noticed that it's a lack of awareness? When we eat in front of the TV, we overeat. But when we sit and eat, we put our attention on the food, we chew the food carefully, we enjoy the food. Probably one of the biggest ways to deal with food is to enjoy the food, to actually sit down and pay total attention to the food. Like in China, the most important thing is how the food looks, and then how the food smells, and then how the food tastes. Because you want that, all of that is satisfying. We so often don't pay attention. We just eat on the run, we eat standing up. A simple thing to do is to say, I'm going to eat this week every day at a table and chair, sitting down with the TV off, just paying attention to the food. What does it taste like? How does my body receive it? How do I feel after I have it? And even the beautiful colors. Every once in a while, I'm just totally taken away by the lovely colors of strawberries with a really distinct taste. So bring awareness to eating. We kind of slow down, pay attention to eating, and allow feedback from our body, and to enjoy the food. To enjoy eating is probably the way to have the best relationship with food. What do you say, Mary? What do you think about that?
I think those are right on, Susan. I would say in approaching this question, just some broad strokes, looking at, number one, what we eat. Again, those food choices, having protein in our diet, eating in a way that will not cause the blood sugar crashes, gradually reducing the salt and sugar and watching those tastes change, but also how we eat, which is exactly what you were talking about, Susan, conscious, mindful eating, getting rid of the TV, not eating at the computer while we check our emails, just getting rid of those distractions. And lastly, why we eat. Are we eating because we're hungry, because we're truly hungry, or are our stomachs full and we're still wanting to eat? What's that about? Am I feeling low? Am I feeling bored? Am I feeling feelings that I don't want to look at? I think it's important to get all parts of ourselves on the same team and make food our friend, not our enemy. And we may think that food is our friend if we're always grabbing for it. But if it's food that we're grabbing and feel bad about having eaten, it's actually become our enemy.
Right.
And then we're beating ourselves up and we're at odds with ourselves. So get all of ourselves on board on the same team. And I think most importantly, especially if emotional eating is a really big factor, to gradually focus more on the positive in our lives than on the negative. And when it comes to food, well, the most important positive, I think, is self-acceptance, really making friends with ourselves. And part of that is the desire to be as healthy as we can. And so where food comes in is being that friend that can help us to be that healthy person that we want to be. If we think of food, if we only think about the foods that we shouldn't eat, it creates a feeling of deprivation. And any deprivation that we've created also creates a void that naturally wants to be filled. And so those cravings can become that much greater, and then we feel that much worse about ourselves. So get all of us, all parts of ourselves on the same team and become friends with food. And I love what you said, Susan, about that mindful eating and noticing the taste, the color, the smell, everything about eating. Really become conscious when we're eating a meal. And I think that those unconscious actions of grabbing for highly palatable, tasty food will lessen naturally.
Right. I think I agree totally.
Excellent. Okay, well, ladies, you've given us some really wonderful information that I think will help women get started in managing their food cravings. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and thank you all for watching our Women's Health Network Google Hangout on food cravings. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also follow us on Google Plus to stay up to date with all of our Hangouts. Susan and Mary, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye now.